Here's Donald Trump sword dancing with men in Saudi Arabia. This is his first foreign visit. Usually that is an honor saved for Canada. Since 1923, all but two presidents have come here on their first trip. More on that in a second. But frankly, the Canadian government has more important things to worry about.
We are very proud of what we have, but we always recognize there are ways to improve and tweak. There are ways to make sure that we're serving Canadians and our businesses even better.
That was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau trying to find the silver lining in the Trump administration's bid to renegotiate NAFTA. The White House notified Congress this week that they'll start talks on the trade deal within 90 days. What sort of improvements is Canada looking for? What will our Foreign Affairs Minister want to achieve in the areas of labor and the environment for Canada? That's where we begin our Sunday Scrum. Joining me today, freelance columnist Susan Riley, John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail, and Denise Cialet from SEM Group Public Affairs. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Carol.
All right.
Good morning.
Let me just ask you, let me go around the table, though, and ask you, we see all the pictures of Donald Trump making quite a splash in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. John, what's your take, first of all, on this being the first foreign trip of the American president?
Well, there are two good reasons why Donald Trump could not have come to Canada as his first trip, foreign trip. The first is the demonstrations would have been impressive, I suspect. There are a great many Canadians who are not happy with Mr. Trump as president and who would have expressed that unhappiness by coming to Ottawa to protest his visit. The Saudis can prevent that sort of thing. The second reason is that he would have nothing to say to Canada other than, I'm planning to rip up the most important trading agreement this country has ever signed, which is not a message that you can deliver to the halls of Parliament. So I hope we will see Mr. Trump in Ottawa. I hope we will see him in the not-too-distant future. I hope we will see him here signing a new and renewed and even more effective North American Free Trade Agreement. But unless and until that happens, there's really no reason for him to come. Yeah,
very, very strange that we didn't see those protests in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would have, and this is really interesting in terms of, even from the perspective, and I'll flip for a second here, from the perspective of the Saudis, this is a bit of a coup, if you will, to have the Americans coming there, and especially after all of Trump's rhetoric around Muslim nations and, make America great again and whatever that is. But this is about Canada now. And for us to think about, look, I would say it's a bit of a snub, and John, it's less about what he has to talk about with Canadians, but this is the greatest trading relationship that the United States has. We are arguably their biggest ally, and this idea that, especially within the context where we are renegotiating NAFTA, there are these bans that are happening. You gotta imagine that the folks at Global Affairs, Foreign Affairs, are losing it, saying, what's going on? We need our ambassador here so we can have a direct line to Trump, the White House, Spence, Priebus, like you name them, right?
Right?
No, actually, I don't think there's anything but profound relief at Foreign Affairs or Global Affairs that Mr. Trump has not come to Canada. It removes an enormous weight that they would have to bear in organizing that trip. I don't think anyone is snubbed by the fact that Donald Trump is not coming to Canada. I certainly know that I'm not, and I don't think most Canadians are either. I think they're happy to have him stay away until there's something positive to say.
Susan, what do you think? Is it a snub?
No, watching your coverage this morning, I think, oh, good, he's got new best friends. That means we're off the radar. And I think the farther we are off his radar, the better the deal is going to evolve for Canada. It will be in the hands of professionals. There's, as we've said many, many times, there's a lot of American interests who are in favor of preserving and perhaps improving this deal. I just read a piece the other day in the Sacramento Bee, of all places, lamenting the fact that NATO's at risk because a lot of California farmers sell so much of their product to Mexico. So even though Canada is not directly implicated, I think Canada, though, is their second export market. Anyway, I think it has an impact unforeseen in some instances all over the states.
Okay, well,
so as long as Trump can get out of it, it's better for us.
We're off the radar for 9 days, but it won't last for long. Chrystia Freeland taking the lead on the NAFTA file as she did in closing CETA. Let's have a listen to what she had to say to reporters on Thursday.
I'm not going to lay all my cards on the table now. I don't think Canadians would like us to do that. We're going to take a very thoughtful and very strategic approach to the negotiations. But two areas that I think could very usefully benefit from modernization in NAFTA are the labor and environment chapters.
All right, we'll talk about the environment and labor chapters. But first of all, John, let me begin with you again. Minister Freeland heading to Mexico soon. What's the strategy there?
I think it's to form a common front with Mexico in trying to contain any damage to NAFTA, because we know that Donald Trump does not want to talk about environmental issues or labor issues. He wants to talk about improving the balance of trade or punishing Canada and the United States, or Canada and Mexico, if we're not able to right that balance in American favor. By the way, I've completely changed my views on this and should acknowledge that. I used to argue that Canada should pursue a bilateral relationship with the United States, that there's no point in trying to come up with agreements between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, because the two economies of Canada and Mexico are so profoundly different. But in this case, where a North American agreement is under threat from the United States, I think it does behoove us to work cooperatively with the Mexicans as much as possible to create a common front and to limit the damage that the Americans are determined to do to this agreement. Okay,
Denise, do you think that we're stronger together?
Absolutely, and certainly I can't help but agree with John on this point, that it's important for the Canadians and the Mexicans to really, and again, we know that this agreement was a trilateral component, and when you have one party that is, making all this noise, and we'll see what they really mean around after the 90 days with the renegotiation. Chrystia Freeland and the team is going down there to really talk it out and hash it out, if you will. But
hash it out in what way, Denise, with the Mexicans?
So I think actually coming up with that common front to say, and we know that Canada first began with the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. And is there now an opening? I don't know. And I would actually support the renegotiation on terms that are solid for Canada of the NAFTA.
What do you think
is there now an opening for, a Canada-Mexico? So there's all kinds of things at play. But part of it is because of the unpredictability of this administration, the Trump administration, around these very, very important. And look, I've got to be blunt here and say, sometimes I don't even think that he or folks in his office know what they're talking about. And we want to see an American ambassador appointed soon, a nominee coming into Canada who can actually help us talk through all of these components to understand the intricacies of how our trade relationships, our borders are interconnected. I just actually don't think that Trump and the folks are advising him get it.
Susan, what do you think? What changes do you expect to see when Chrystia Freeland talks about modernizing the agreement to include labor updates and environment updates? What would you like to see or expect to see there?
I don't know. I'm mystified. All I know is that language comes from, oh boy, at least 10 years ago, when the opponents, during the anti-globalization movement, there came up another idea, which was fair trade. And it was based on making things better for workers internationally and including environmental protections. That language has now been assumed by Trudeau and Freeland. On the environment, you're not going to get really much of a hearing from Donald Trump or the people around him, clearly. Although, interesting, if you recall, Obama and Trudeau agreed to reductions in methane emissions, which are powerful and damaging. There was then Trump signed an executive order undoing those regulations, but the Senate ended up, the Senate in the United States ended up contradicting that, so that those methane regulations still stand. So there's all sorts of different players and different sides of this argument. But and John may know better than I, but my sense is that Freeland will be running into a closed door on the environment.
No, absolutely she will. But the thing is, though, there is a need to modernize NAFTA. It's 25 years old. And there is a renegotiated NAFTA already sitting there waiting to be signed. It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There was, I believe, a dozen Pacific nations that spent years negotiating a comprehensive trade agreement. Canada and the United States and Mexico were part of it. And the TPP was supposed to be NAFTA 2.0. It was going to modernize government procurement regulations. It was going to modernize intellectual property. It was going to do all those good things to bring the agreement into the 21st century. But Donald Trump, one of his very first acts as president was to scuttle the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I think what Canada's going to try to do is actually try to, and Mexico will try to import the provisions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership into a new and renegotiated NAFTA. That's going to be their joint goal.
But it didn't have much to say about the environment, did it, John?
Nothing. Zero.
Exactly.
No,
purely economic.
But the backdrop to all of this is the rise of populism as well. People like Donald Trump and others have risen in popularity, have risen to power, in part, at least, on the disenfranchisement of so many people who have felt like these big trade agreements were nothing more than the elites are enriching themselves. So doesn't there have to be some change in these agreements to satisfy that constituency?
And that's why the focus on labor is interesting.
Denise, go ahead.
That would be the Trump administration's, if I may suggest, their very first priority in terms of speaking to the issues around labor and the loss of jobs as they perceive it to Mexico. Our concern, my concern as a Canadian, is how are our parliamentarians, and in particular Chrystia Freeland, when she goes down there, when these discussions are happening, what is the case that we're making for Canada? And you've got to bring Mexico on board, on side as an ally, as part of this conversation.
Well, it sounds like she's going to be exploring that possibility this week, and we'll see what happens there. We'll leave NAFTA there for now. We'll be talking about it again soon enough.